Mike here from Transportation Professional. Fred Jones, I'm taken with the latest iteration of Uber Pool, and I see that it suits customers in cities. But what about carpooling for longer distance journeys? Could Uber Pool one day help to take people from London to Manchester with other people who may not want to pay a huge price for travelling on the trains at peak times, for instance?
Well, we're innovating in a number of product areas to solve either kind of a rural or longer distance use case. In Egypt, we recently launched Uber Bus, which is kind of high capacity vehicles, which is better suited to more suburban environments and rural environments. The intercity transport is an interesting one because you might argue, well, actually, is a train better or something like that? So rather than always defaulting to a shared vehicle, I think there are many situations where that would work. But actually, if there's existing transport modes that are quicker and cheaper for those longer distance and faster, then maybe we're looking to integrate those into the app so consumers can make more informed choices.
Okay, thank you. Question, Martin.
Thankfully, that didn't end in a problem. It's Martin Tugwell. I'm England's economic heartland. It's kind of building on Mike's question. Great innovation, not just by Uber, but other providers of services which are focused very much on what the user is looking for. And I'd just be interested, not just from Uber's perspective, but just generally from the panel, at what point do the providers of these services become the transport authority? Because the transport algorithms that you're using to influence choice, whether you go by car, whether you go by bike, one would say that's traditionally been kind of the policy drivers of transport authorities. So at what point does the private sector become the transport authority by default? I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but I'm just thinking about what are the challenges for us as a profession moving forward?
There's some cities in the US where Uber's partnered with the local authority there to plug a gap that they're unable to provide for. So there was an example where, in the cost-benefit analysis they did around opening up and funding a new bus route, actually for a fraction of the cost, they could use that money to subsidize point-to-point Uber rides. So there's a kind of maybe a new model for doing that. Here in London is actually, TfL operate the buses, the bikes, etc. Is actually their ambitions around active travel and mode shift, I think, are really well aligned to what we're trying to do with the phone app. But in terms of integrating with their data, I don't think it's about a monopoly of one provider controlling it. I actually think having that kind of competition and different choice is good because that's what drives innovation in that respect. So I don't think there's kind of one transport authority or not, but I think there's going to be some really interesting models about how different participants work together.
I think there's always a role for public sector to create that alignment and balance, and I think it's about giving that option of choice. I think that the bad is when you look at its competition, that Uber's competing with other transport modes. There's space for all different transport, whether that be bus, train, personal journeys, and I think it's about how you can then align that and create that integrated model for the user, because there'll be different points, rather than seeing them as competition and playing one against each other. So it's creating that whole transport system, and I think the new modes of transport that's been keen for the last few years adds more choice, but it's how you integrate that choice from there.
I'm not an expert in this area, but more from a consumer perspective, I suppose I would want to have the choice, like you say, the most innovative way of doing it that gives me the choice in the most cost-effective way. So actually, from a consumer perspective, don't necessarily care how it's achieved. Collaboration is probably the best way.
It's a question for the whole panel. What role do you think companies like Uber could and should play in collecting data and supplying data that helps us make better decisions across the board about how we manage and improve our network and the transport infrastructure?
Okay, question about data sharing. Fred, do you want to give
Yeah, I mean, do you know, it's one of the top questions when we kind of work and collaborate with cities is, can we have your data? In response to that, we created, because cities need it and that's where the value is, we created a tool called Uber Movement, which is free to use for anyone, city planners, policy officials, which aggregates and kind of shares our data in a kind of compliant manner The first iteration of the tool does point-to-point journey times, and you can look back over, go back in time and see how, traveling from, Kensington to Chalk Farm has changed over different times of the day. And what's really interesting about that is when there's been, say, some major roadworks, when Tower Bridge, for example, was closed and renovated, you could see how the ripple effect went across London and impacted journey times miles away just because of how traffic moves interacts with the road network. So that was just the first iteration, and through that tool we're going to be building in new data sets that we've got. So speeds, sharp braking to identify potentially unsafe junctions, potentially even using the gyroscope in the phone you can identify potholes. So I think there's a huge role. We're right at the start of it. I think there's a lot more we can do on that tool, but it's something that's really important to us.
And Alexandra, how would wider sources of data help your work?
I think it leads on to the point I made at the very end, where if you're taking more of a high-level view of a sort of system or whole network, how data like that, and certainly looking at trends, say, over different periods of time over the year, where people are using different parts of the network, then inform from an asset management perspective when's the best time to do your maintenance, or when's an absolute no-no for doing any maintenance. So using those trends to give you a much richer picture of how you manage your assets at a portfolio level.
We believe in government open shared data, and we've moved quite a big way of opening government's data to other sectors, and we're doing a lot of work with car companies at the moment to help them plan for autonomous vehicles and everything else. And I think it's the two-way, is that data back to us to enrich our knowledge. I think the second part of that is having the infrastructure to handle that data, and at the moment we're not all quite there, so we can have all that data, but it's back to Alexander's point of how do you turn it into insight and information from then. So we need to improve our technology and our infrastructure to receive that data and translate it, but we need our private sector companies to give us that data in the first place.
Highways England have decided that the role of the integrator is a key part of improving delivery and productivity. With the trialling of different models, how long do you think it will be until you've got a set of clear roles and sort of some outcomes of that?
Yeah, and it's a difficult stage as we move into the mobilisation implementation. So I think we're looking at within the next 3 years to have really got to the optimisation. For certainly the DIP is that sort of 3-year horizon to get to where we need it to be, but there's some milestones in that piece. For the Alliance, it's looking at that same sort of period, but they'll have different challenges and what we're looking at. So the key thing for us as Highways is not looking for an immediate reaction in day one. We do see this as a 1, 2, 3 year journey, but it's then got to have that point when we can achieve that integration and making sure they run at different speeds and recognising the different challenges.